April 18, 2026, Dr. Michael Salla was joined by Gene Decode, military insider JP, to share and compare their research and knowledge surrounding the 2026 exopolitical state of the planet.
以下摘自萨拉赫博士的讲话，分享他对地外政治的看法。伊朗局势。
Today, we are going to be looking at what is happening around the world as far as the exopolitics is concerned. And so exopolitics, just loosely explaining what the term means, is all about the political implications of extraterrestrial life, and we're going to apply an exopolitical filter to world events. With world events, most people that understand these use a geopolitical analysis, which is they look at what's going on in terms of geopolitics and what is available in open source literature. But we know in the exopolitical field or in ufology, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes. In fact, most of the really important stuff happens behind the scenes. So that means that we really need to apply this exopolitical filter to understanding what's going on. And so today, the big issue that a lot of people are dealing with, of course, is Iran. And what we are going to start with is this deep dive into the whole question about what is really going on with Iran. And I did an exopolitical commentary a few days ago that I'm sure many of you have seen, where I talk about Iran and some of the theories surrounding it in terms of what is it that's really driving the conflict there. A lot of people say, well, it's all about oil, it's all about Israel's Greater Israel Project, and that the US is being pressured into this because of the Israeli lobby, and Donald Trump is really a puppet or easily manipulated by the whole Netanyahu administration and the APEC lobby that he has relied on in the past. And so that's the kind of prevailing theory that a lot of people have. But what we look at in terms of exopolitics is, well, what is it that's going on behind the scenes that might give us a means of understanding this? Is it really because of oil? Is it really because of the Greater Israel Project that this is going on? Or is it because something else is going on behind the scenes? All right, so what I'm going to do now is start off with a video clip from General Wesley Clark from 2001. And why I want to show this and why I believe this is very important for us is that it shows that plans for attacking Iran go back to 2001, and that it was part of a much bigger plan. So those people that say, well, Donald Trump is just beholden to the Israeli lobby and is doing this because this helps maintain Benjamin Netanyahu's position as prime minister, and he needs another war to stay in power and to avoid corruption charges. Those kinds of explanations, they really don't apply if the plan to invade Iran dates back to 2001. So let's listen to General Wesley Clark and what he had to say about this. So,
about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you gotta come in. You gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
That really is very significant what General Wesley Clark said. I mean, that the general he visited in the Pentagon in 2001 after the 9/11 attack had received these plans from the Secretary of Defense at the time, who was Donald Rumsfeld, that the plan was that there were going to be 7 countries that would be attacked. Now, this is not the only plan that was in existence in terms of what the elite were planning to do that would involve a number of countries culminating in Iran. There was also a plan that Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan described back in 2010. They interviewed a whistleblower, a Navy commander, who that was from the Royal Navy, who became a board member of the City of London, and he attended meetings, and they also talked about plans for creating a series of Middle East wars that would culminate in Iran being attacked, and that would suck in China, and that this would be something that would expand into a major regional war, if not a third world war. So this was called the Anglo-Saxon Mission, and that was really, I think, a pretty clear example of a plan to start a major war, a regional war, and that as a result of that war, that there would be a much reduced global population, and that would make it easier for the elites to take control. So, really, was this plan to attack Iran all about creating the conditions for a Gog and Magog end times war? There are many people that will say that's exactly what was going on, and I think that's the truth about what really was going on with these plans to attack Iran and to attack other countries, to create a major regional kind of crisis, get rid of authoritarian regimes and replace them with failed states or weak regimes. So was this all about creating a Gog and Magog end times war, or something else? Was something else really underlying this? So this is where I think we really need to look at some technological developments that help explain why it was that all of a sudden in 2001 and 2005 that the Anglo-Saxon mission, that particular plan was derived in 2005. So why was it that in the early 2000s all of a sudden you had these plans for a series of wars? The development of, or the uses, or the development of advanced types of ground-penetrating radar was really something that helps explain what it was that was going on here. So ground-penetrating radar is a geophysical method that uses radar pulses to image the subsurface. So obviously you can look underground, not in great detail, you can make out the composition of different layers, and of course ground-penetrating radar is used extensively in the oil industry for being able to identify oil deposits, and because you can tell the difference between, say, oil deposits, liquid, as opposed to surrounding rocks and other forms of material that may be in an area that is under the ground. Now, in 1972, the Apollo 17 mission carried a ground-penetrating radar in orbit around the moon, and it was able to record to a depth of up to 1.3 kilometers. So here you have a satellite-based application of ground-penetrating radar that could see under a depth of 1.3 kilometers. And again, those early technologies were not very precise in terms of exactly what was being imaged, but still it gave the controllers or NASA or those that were using GPR a means of understanding what was under the surface. So this is where we get into the use of GPR that found anomalies in certain countries in the early 2000s or late 1990s. According to a book authored by Radu Cinema, who is a real person, even though it's an anonymous title, and he described how a US spy satellite using GPR found abnormalities or anomalies, there were anomalies in Romania and Iraq that were discovered. And so there were missions that were sent to Romania and Iraq. Somehow they arranged for missions, even though the US and the global elite didn't have easy access to those countries at the time. And there were covert operations, and they were able to discover something under the ground of great significance. And there were military special forces that did this, and they were joined by Freemasons, high-level Freemasons. And so Transylvanian Sunrise explains how these high-level Freemasons were working with US military special forces to go into Romania and to find out what that anomaly was. And they found a hall of records and a space-time portal located under the Bujej mountain that actually had a tunnel system that led to other locations such as Egypt, Iraq, and Tibet. And there were these space-time portals that did this. And they found a similar anomaly underneath Iraq as well. So there you get an idea of how the developments in GPR using satellite technology could discover anomalies in different countries that would then come to the attention of the secret government. And so this is where we get into the ancient artifacts being discovered. And this is described in Transylvanian Sunrise. So this is what was written, quote, Signor Massini led me to understand that the elements of the internal artificial structure from Bujej would not have particularly attracted the Masonic elite's interest had it not been for the fact that their representative from the Pentagon had noticed that the semi-spherical blockage had exactly the same frequency and shape as one from another secret underground structure that they had discovered just a few months before somewhere near Baghdad. So just think about that. Using satellite spy technology equipped with GPR, they're finding anomalies under the ground at a certain depth in Iraq, near Baghdad, and they found the same thing in Romania. So the Masonic elite was extremely interested in the secret data the military espionage satellite had registered in connection with the strange energetic structure from Iraq's underground. So there you have an explanation for what it was that brought the anomaly under the Bujej mountain to the attention of the US Special Forces and the Masonic elite or the global elite. So what happened was that these anomalies were discovered to be ancient artifacts in both Romania and Iraq. And in the case of Romania, it was pressured to join NATO. In the case of Iraq, it was invaded in 2003. So both of these events happened in 2003. But before that, you had the discovery of the anomalies, covert missions are sent there to find out what these anomalies are all about, and they find out that these are actually ancient structures and technologies and stargates or portals. So this gives us an idea that such discoveries explain why the invasion plans described by Wesley Clark and the Anglo-Saxon mission were developed under the orders of the global elite and the Freemasons. So we can understand that the people that instructed the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, back in 2001 after the 9/11 attack, to come up with plans to attack these 7 Middle East nations, culminating in Iran, that they were part of this same global elite structure involving Freemasons who wanted to find out what was buried, because they were finding many anomalies all over the Middle East, because clearly the Middle East is a very ancient land with ancient civilizations and empires going back millennia. There are many things buried underground, and with satellite-based GPR, they were starting to find these, and so to get access, they wanted to have the US and its allies, and that would include Israel, to be able to go into these countries. And so I think that kind of gives us some context for understanding what it was that was really driving this plan for attacking 7 Middle East nations, including Iran. Now, back in 2003, I wrote a paper, a long paper called An Exopolitical Perspective on the Preemptive War against Iraq. And that paper really outlined the kind of evidence that was available that this technology that was being found in places like Iraq and elsewhere involved portals or involved stargates. And I think this paper I wrote back in 2003 presented all the evidence in terms of what was discovered in Iraq, that there were archaeological discoveries, the tomb of Gilgamesh, that there were whistleblowers who were coming forward back in 2003, so 23 years ago, people talking about a stargate found in Iraq. And so there were whistleblowers that were talking about this and describing how there were these cuneiform texts that described how these stargates operated. And so this was part of the rationale for the invasion of Iraq, that they wanted to get their hands on these cuneiform texts, because not only did they describe some of the Anunnaki, but also the stargates, and they described how these stargates operated. And so that was very important to the global elite. So this takes us to the question of, well, if there are these stargates and portals that are found all over the world, then how does this kind of like figure into the whole exopolitical domain? Well, there's a book by Ashley Dean called Voyages 1 and 2 that described the Stargate system around the world. And she described 12 principal stargates, that there were also lots of portals around the world, but that there were 12 principal stargates. And this was back in, her book was 2002, it came out. And she described stargates as planetary portals connecting Earth to higher dimensions and star systems. Right there you have the information that this is an energetic connection between our planet with high dimensions and other star systems, and that energetic connection can be utilized for travel or for sending information. We're talking instantaneous communications, we're talking about travel and other things like that. There we are. That's the Stargate system around the world that was described by Ashley Dean in the Voyages book. Now, she also said that they are part of Earth's original energy grid that supports planetary evolution. Stargates are sought after by negative groups for control purposes. So this is part of the energy grid of the planet, kind of like similar to the chakra system that we are supposed to have, depending on your perspective, either 7 or 12 chakras that are vital for a kind of optimal health at a personal level. So similarly, the planet Earth as a living organism has 12 chakras or 12 stargates that are vital for planetary health. And if you want to take control of the Earth, if you're a negative group, whether we're talking about global elite or you're talking about extraterrestrials, then you want to take control of these stargates. So this is where she talks about some of the areas on the planet that are being sought after by these negative groups. This is what she had to say in the Voyager's book. Quote, areas such as Pakistan, Iraq, and Iran are territories housing key access sites to the coveted Stargate 10. So these areas, as well as others, will be preliminary zones of conquest that the UIR, which stands for United Intruder Resistance, will attempt to secure under UIR Illuminati governance. So they're describing the alliance between negative groups, both human and extraterrestrials, to take control of these stargates. And the one in particular that is being described here of great significance is this, in the Middle East, is Stargate 10. So here is a kind of close-up of that larger planetary grid of 12 stargates, which zooms in on the stargates in Iran and Egypt, and also there, I think France, and also looks like there's one in the Himalayas. But the Stargate 10 that Ashanadine described as very significant, that's located in an island called Abadan, which is on the Iran-Iraq border, that became part of Iran in 1847 after it was handed over to the Iranians by the Ottoman Empire, and that in the 1980 to 1988 war, Abadan was besieged by Iraqi forces that were being sponsored by the US. So that's very, very interesting that the US supported Iraq in the war against Iran, and that this city was besieged but never taken over. It never surrendered. So this Stargate 10 has always been under the control of the Iranian state since the revolution in 1979. Iran has been off limits for the US Special Forces or the global elite operating through the US. What we know now, based on some of the material I've presented, is that there's a lot of ancient tech hidden all over the Middle East underground, and in Iran in particular, that this was being discovered by the global elite using ground-penetrating radar located on satellites. So they're finding these things all over the place, and they want to get access to Iran, and I think that is the reason why the plans were put together for invading Iran. Now, what were the Iranians doing during this entire period? Well, the important thing is that the Iranians learned from the Iraq war that the only safe place to build your military infrastructure is underground. I mean, they experienced a 10-year, like a war, an 8-year war with Iraq from 1980 to 1988, and of course both sides bombed each other's military facilities, and the Iranians began to learn about the importance of developing underground structures for their military resources. Now, after the bombing campaign against Iraq in 2003, where smart weapons were used to destroy the Iraqi military infrastructure, the Iranians realized that what they needed to do was to build underground. So that's what they did. They began building huge underground facilities for their missiles and for their nuclear enrichment or nuclear weapons program. And as they're building these huge underground military facilities, they're coming across ancient artifacts. They're coming across older tunnel systems, and they're finding ancient cities. So this is actually documented in some of the discoveries that have been made, that there are ancient underground cities from the Sassanid and the Persian empires. So we're talking several thousand years old underground cities that are under Iran that were being discovered, and that these cities obviously had artifacts dating back several thousands of years. So this is where we get the understanding that the Iranians were finding things underground that they were trying to utilize, trying to develop with their own scientific resources, and that the global elite, meanwhile, are using satellite GPR to find these underground anomalies, and they're wanting to send teams there, but of course they can't do it because there are no agreements with the Iranian regime. Now, what were some of the things that were being discovered? They discovered such things as ancient stasis chambers with giants or beings held in a state of hibernation for thousands of years, and that these beings were being sought out by the military intelligence community all over the world, as well as the global elite. And these stasis giants were also found in Iran. So there's evidence for this, actually. There was a leaked video that came out that showed one of these stasis beings being discovered in 2008. So this video shows us a discovery in 2008 of a stasis being. A being was discovered in Iran that was very, very old, with red hair, huge beard, and they believed that this was actually the mage Haramir, or Yaromir, that this was the name of this being that they discovered in this chamber. And it's 12,000 years old, and that this was leaked in 2008. Here you have evidence of the kind of discoveries that were being made as the Iranians were digging these underground tunnels or excavating an ancient underground tunnel system that they had found there. So that was the kind of things that were being discovered in this underground tunnel system. These are stasis beings, and of course there were also giants in stasis chambers that were being discovered that were of great interest to the global elite. In terms of, is there more evidence for this rather than a leaked video that these kinds of stasis chambers exist and that they were being found in Iran? Well, there actually is. There's a passage from Marco Polo's book. So Marco Polo, he traveled through Iran in the 13th century, and on his travels through Iran, he saw something there that actually was a stasis being. What he wrote in his book was, quote, "Persia is a large country, and in ancient times it was even larger and more powerful. There is a city here called Saba, from which the three wise men came to worship Jesus Christ. They are buried here in three large, beautiful tombs, and all three are identical and well maintained. The bodies of the Magi are completely intact, with their hair and beards." So this matches what we just saw in that video, that leaked video with Yaromir, the mage, that the hair and the beards were perfectly preserved, the bodies were perfectly preserved, that this kind of stasis technology exists, and that this was the sort of thing that had been found in Iran back in the 13th century. So now you have Iranian forces starting to dig underground for their missile production facilities, and they stumble upon these ancient artifacts, these ancient cities. They find an older, more extensive tunnel system. So what do the Iranians do? Well, they ask for help. They get help. So who do they go to? They got the Chinese to help, and the Chinese were very happy to help because the Chinese are very aware of these kinds of ancient artifacts that date back many, many thousands of years ago. And some of these artifacts involve advanced technologies. Now here is a Google AI overview that explains, based on many reports, that the Chinese were helping the Iranians in their underground excavations and construction projects. Quote, reports suggest Chinese companies and engineering experts are assisting Iran in developing, reinforcing, and expanding its underground tunnel networks. This support includes providing specialized tunnel boring machines, mining machinery, and technical expertise to build deeper, reinforced facilities. So there you have a very important statement in terms of the Iranians being helped by the Chinese, that the Chinese have a lot of expertise in building underground systems because the Chinese are very sophisticated, and they understood in order to hide a lot of their military resources and their projects, they needed to hide these from US military satellites, and so they had to go underground. And so they developed a lot of skills in underground construction, and that this was something that they showed or were helping the Iranians in doing. And of course, so the Iranians were having access to these ancient underground artifacts. And of course, the military, the US military, using GPR, satellite-based GPR, starting to see that there are these anomalies there under Iran, and that the Iranians are building things near these anomalies, and that they're being helped by the Chinese. So this helps us get a better understanding of the exopolitical motivation behind the US global elite plans to invade Iran. It was a matter of great national and actually global national security that they prevented the Iranians from going there and being helped by the Chinese and giving the Chinese access to everything that was being discovered in Iran. Now, recently I interviewed Jean Decode, and what Jean said in our interview was that he confirmed that there were these ancient regional tunnel systems that exist in Iran up to a depth of 10 kilometers. Now, 10 kilometers is pretty deep, but remember back in 1972, Apollo 17 using GPR that was deployed in the Apollo's in the satellite, the Apollo satellite system, they were able to see about 1.3 kilometers underneath the moon. So that was in 1972. So you can imagine by the early 2000s, the GPR had become much more sophisticated, and so they were able to see at great depths. And so they were able to see these ancient regional tunnel systems that are up to 10 kilometers or more in depth, and that these were being used for trafficking captive humans, and that there were battles that were being fought between the Deep State and the Earth Alliance. So the Earth Alliance was developing or getting access to these deep underground tunnel systems, and that there was a misuse of portals and exotic technology by Iran and China. So this gives us an idea of what it was that was kind of like driving the US to launch this attack, this preemptive attack on Iran. Now, is there evidence for this? Well, Jean pointed to the US Geological Survey, and we got to discuss some of the evidence for these underground battles that were occurring
在深达10公里的海平面上，伊朗的情况更糟。所以这里是 AA 美国地质调查局提供的地图，那显示了伊朗的地震。
The earthquakes in Iran over the last 30 days, so from March 16 to April 15. So this was something I just pulled up a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, and it shows earthquake vicinity around in the region of Iran. You see, there's nothing else happening around in Iraq or in Saudi Arabia, but in Iran there was lots of earthquake activity happening at
深度可达10公里或更深，更多还有这个基因被引用了。这是这些地下活动的证据，战斗期间发生的。
During
这次
the
行动，他们管它叫什么来着？愤怒极的。美国当时和以色列对伊朗发动了先发制人的攻击，所以当时就发生了这件事。掩盖那段史诗狂怒行动，实际上这只是你这些努力的掩护，将特种部队派往伊朗，为了控制这些网站。这些异常现象已被发现旱地雷达以及在哪里。伊朗人在中国的帮助下，他们正在获取访问权限，或者他们正即将获得存取权限，就是这样。那是一次非常有趣的地震，因为我觉得，正如吉恩所说，的确如此。把那件事记录下来，伊朗境内正在发生一些事情。这仅仅是地震活动吗？还是另有其他原因？这些战斗的证据以及第二步，我认为这就是证据，仅此而已。将会详细阐述这一点。小组讨论准备好了吗？更多内容，请前往我们的 Patreon 页面到 Vimeo 或 Broadcast 的关于 Code JP 的整个网络研讨会。麦克萨拉赫博士，连接在描述中。您一直在收听的是地外政治节目，连线麦克尔萨拉赫博士的按赞、分享、订阅，欢迎来到这个频道，加入或建立评论区里的对话。是时候探索浩瀚的图书馆了。销书、网络研讨会和萨拉赫博士的播客访问 exopoliticstoday.com。